The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the ochre walls. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and crushed earth. Footsteps echoed through the silent chambers, whispers of rituals older than memory. Scrolls, carved stones, and perfumed leaves lined the sacred spaces, hiding secrets that even the elders feared to speak aloud. In the shadows, desire and law collided, and the lines between power, lust, and obedience blurred. Every gesture, every whispered command held weight. Every ledger, every seal, recorded actions never meant to be seen. Imagine the forbidden stories, passed in murmurs, where the sacred intertwined with the carnal, where innocence and manipulation danced together. In this world, every glance could betray, every ritual could punish. A thin mist hovered over the red sands, carrying scents of smoke and crushed eucalyptus. Torchlight flickered across the ceremonial stones. In these sacred grounds, elders whispered of desire, control, and punishment. Every footstep echoed rules broken and secrets revealed. The Dreamtime concealed lust and law in equal measure, waiting to be discovered. The night stretched over the vast plains, shadows twisting across sandstone outcrops. A circle of carved stones formed a stage for rituals older than memory. Mossy ochre and perfumed leaves covered the ground, while small fires cast tremulous golden light. Elders gathered silently, faces painted, eyes sharp with both curiosity and fear. Among them, Jaragan, a young initiator, approached the sacred circle carrying bundles of leaves and animal bones. The summons had arrived in the form of carved tokens placed at his dwelling, instructing him to attend or face disgrace. Each token, sealed with ochre pigment, bore ritual inscriptions that hinted at trials not meant for the faint-hearted. The shadows moved as if alive, murmurs rising from distant bushes, whispering about the interplay of obedience and desire. Jaragan's hands trembled as he arranged the leaves in patterns dictated by tradition, aware that every action could be witnessed, recorded, or misinterpreted. The very ground seemed to pulse with anticipation. Even the air thickened with a scent that suggested both danger and allure. A distant drum beat counting time for unseen rituals, marking the balance between punishment and temptation. One wrong gesture could expose hidden desires no one dared speak. The elders' murmurs grew louder as torch smoke curled in the cold night air. Small fragments of observation drifted among the witnesses. A cleaner had seen shadows behind barked walls. A clerk had noted unusual movements in his ledger, though none dared record specifics. Rumors of previous initiates circulated, each story layered with fear, fascination, and moral unease. Dusty scrolls hinted at acts recorded with meticulous care, names, dates, and positions, each checked and sealed in clay tokens. Perfumed leaves carried impressions of hands, traces of ritual and indulgence intertwined. Observers claimed that even minor movements were scrutinized, measured against the codes of the Dreamtime. The atmosphere throbbed with tension. Every flicker of torchlight could reveal an act, an intention, a lapse in ritual precision. Whispers spoke of the thin line between sacred training and temptation. Some of the initiated were rumored to have succumbed, marking themselves in ways that history recorded only in oblique references. Each token, each observation, added to a ledger of desire and control. Eyes followed Jaragan as he arranged ceremonial objects, aware that these objects could reveal far more than the elders intended. A single misstep could transform observation into accusation. A small envelope of pressed leaves and initialed notes appeared beneath a carved stone. It was an evidence drop, left by an ally who dared to chronicle the ceremonies in secret. The packet contained one line that cut through the silence. "This is the price of obedience." Jaragan's pulse quickened as he realized the ritual was not only a test of knowledge, but a trap to reveal hidden desires. The elders had long used such packets to gauge loyalty, to to expose the tension between law and personal inclination. Within minutes, movements he had thought discreet became scrutinized, every subtle shift interpreted as confession. The perfumed leaves, arranged meticulously, now seemed to whisper secrets, revealing a hierarchy of privilege and suppressed longing. Shadows elongated under the torchlight, hinting at acts unseen by outsiders, but fully observed by those present. The evidence drop created a shift. Protectors of tradition now appeared as enforcers, and mere witnesses might become participants unwillingly. The sacred ground seemed alive, reacting to every ritual gesture, amplifying the stakes. An observation meant to record devotion could become the proof of transgression. By dawn, the ritual concluded, leaving the circle scarred with impressions of bodies, leaves, and whispered secrets. The elders moved silently, assessing the outcomes. Jaragan, though unscathed in appearance, carried the weight of exposure and temptation. The ledgers, tokens, and notes had ensured that each act, each hesitation, had been captured. Lessons of power, lust, and obedience intertwined, leaving no participant unaffected. News of the ritual's outcome spread across distant camps in hushed murmurs. Compliance, desire, and subtle humiliation had all played their roles. The balance between sacred law and personal longing became a tale repeated across generations, a warning encoded in leaves, stones, and smoke. The ground held the memory of transgression and submission alike. Observers carried the knowledge of what was permissible, what might be punished, and what would remain hidden, yet recorded. Jaragan realized the sacred space was not only a site of initiation, but a stage for power, control, and the quiet, insidious revelation of desire. Even those who escaped shame bore the silent mark of the ritual, a knowledge that could return in unexpected forms. The sun rose over ochre plains, casting golden light on stones still warm from the night. Every leaf, every token, whispered of acts both forbidden and required. The Dreamtime held lust and law in fragile balance, teaching that obedience could conceal desire, and that desire could rewrite the rules of sacred tradition. A low wind stirred the dry leaves, carrying the scent of smoke and crushed bark across the sacred hollow. Shadows danced beneath torchlight, illuminating ochre patterns etched into stone. Desire lingered invisibly among the ritual circles, intertwined with power and fear. Every step, every gesture promised revelation or consequence beyond the witness's imagination. The hollow lay at the heart of a winding canyon, its walls etched with ancient glyphs and painted in ochres of red, gold, and black. Fires flared in carefully placed pits, casting flickering light across the circle where the community's initiates gathered. Among them, Marlu, a young apprentice with eyes alert to instruction and mischief, approached carrying bundles of smoke-infused leaves. A carved shell used to summon attention had been left at the entrance of the hollow. Its tone declared that attendance was mandatory. The elders observed silently, their faces painted in ceremonial patterns, signaling authority and expectation. Perfumed leaves released faint hints of sweet and bitter scents, mingling with smoke and dust, thickening the atmosphere with tension. Every footstep resonated against sandstone walls, echoing the fragile line between obedience and transgression. Marlu's role was clear, to arrange objects according to strict ritual guidelines, yet the instructions were deliberately ambiguous, designed to reveal desire as much as compliance. Tiny inscriptions on tokens hinted at previously unspoken acts, indicating that even minor deviations might be noticed. The air pulsed with anticipation, the weight of potential exposure pressed down on the circle. One misplacement of leaves or token could betray hidden impulses no one dared name. The elders moved like shadows among the young initiates, their eyes sharp and unyielding. Observations traveled swiftly. Whispers of past missteps, murmured concerns, and ledgered entries recording subtle gestures. Dust-stained tokens, each bearing inked symbols, were checked and double-checked by the appointed recorders, noting the alignment of leaves, footprints, and body positioning. Rumors fluttered through the circle, carried on the dry canyon air. Some initiates had been accused previously of yielding to temptation in hidden alcoves, their secrets preserved in sealed ledgers and whispered commentaries. The hollow reverberated with faint sounds, brush against stone, rustling leaves, the hiss of fire, that hinted at actions not fully visible. Marlou noticed discrepancies in the patterns, certain leaves slightly misaligned, and realized that the elder's scrutiny was almost obsessive, measuring compliance against an unseen standard of purity and submission. Even the smallest gestures, tilt of the head, placement of hands, could be interpreted as proof of desire, recorded and referenced for months or years to come. Perfumed smoke carried traces of previous rituals, a subtle record of bodies and movements, desire and discipline intertwined. The young apprentice felt the tension rising, the pressure of invisible eyes, the unspoken warning that observation itself could be weaponized. Every flicker of motion might transform curiosity into accusation and suspicion into documented shame. A sealed clay token slid quietly across the sandstone floor, a deliberate evidence drop. Within it, a pressed leaf and small folded note bore the words, "Obedience hides secrets, secrets reveal selves." Marlou's pulse accelerated, understanding that the ritual was not merely instructive, but also investigative. The elder's methods ensured that every act, every hesitation, every involuntary gesture became potential evidence. Shadows lengthened as torches burned lower, highlighting hidden inscriptions on stones that recorded prior transgressions. The packet's arrival flipped the balance of power. Observers became enforcers, and participants became both performers and subjects of scrutiny. Perfumed smoke swirled around Marlou, carrying the faint scent of prior ceremonies, mixing pleasure and terror in a thick, almost tangible haze. Stone seemed to hum with the memory of bodies past, their impressions captured in pressed leaves, tokens, and subtle marks that only the elders fully understood. Patterns carefully recorded in ledgers now revealed nuances, how desire intertwined with obedience, how suppression often masked curiosity or temptation. What appeared as a simple lesson had transformed into a subtle, precise investigation of the human will under scrutiny. By the first rays of morning, the ritual circle bore the weight of night's scrutiny. Leaves lay in meticulous arrangement, tokens were returned to their sacred receptacles, and the hollow retained the faint scent of perfumed smoke. Marlou emerged with knowledge of obedience, desire, and the unseen rules that governed both. Ledger entries, tokens, and evidence drops ensured that acts were recorded, lessons reinforced, and boundaries marked. Across distant camps, whispers carried the moral: compliance could conceal desire, but desire could not remain hidden. Elders moved silently among the stones, eyes catching subtle shifts that confirmed what the ritual had revealed. Every gesture, even those thought discreet, had contributed to the cumulative record of human behavior under ceremonial pressure. Perfumed smoke, tokens, and inscriptions combined to create a living archive of both law and lust. The balance between sacred tradition and human inclination became an enduring lesson, transmitted in whispered stories, ceremonial patterns, and recorded observations. The ritual had not only tested the apprentices, but also reminded the community that power, observation, and desire existed in fragile equilibrium. Even when the circle emptied, its lessons lingered, haunting movements and decisions long after the fires had died. Faint smoke and whispers of ritual secrets. Stones glimmered in morning light, etched with impressions of bodies, tokens, and leaves. The Dreamtime taught that obedience concealed desire, and that desire, even hidden, could be revealed in subtle patterns, leaving a permanent mark on both ritual and psyche. Thunder rolled softly over the sandstone cliffs, carrying the acrid scent of burnt wood and resin. Within the ceremonial ring, shadows stretched across ochre markings. Secrets clung to the air like mist. Desire and fear moved together in invisible currents. The elders watched silently, recording both obedience and hesitation with unerring precision. At the edge of a hidden waterhole where reeds whispered against sandstone, a circle had been drawn for the moonlight ceremony. Wati, an adolescent apprentice, approached the center carrying an intricate arrangement of shells and carved bones. The elders' faces, painted in black and red pigments, were stern yet unreadable, reflecting authority tempered by the weight of tradition. The ritual was meant to instruct in both sacred history and human nature, but the instructions were purposefully layered with ambiguity. Each action, each placement of shells, could signify devotion or temptation depending on who watched. Small ceremonial fires crackled, sending shadows dancing across faces, accentuating the tension and unspoken rules. Wati felt the gaze of unseen eyes in every flicker of flame. A small ledger, kept hidden in the folds of bark and reeds, tracked compliance and deviation. The ritual was not merely educational, it was evaluative. Every movement carried consequence, every misstep a potential mark against the apprentice. Perfumed smoke from crushed leaves mingled with the earthy scent of wet sandstone, heightening both awareness and unease. A single misaligned shell or misplaced bone could transform innocent curiosity into documented transgression, noticed only by those who had watched in silence. The circle pulsed with quiet tension, broken only by the faint rustle of reeds and the whisper of water over stones. Elders circulated slowly, their eyes sweeping over each gesture, each hesitant tilt of the head. Wati's hands trembled slightly as shells were placed in the designated order, yet even the smallest hesitation was logged in the hidden ledger. Fragments of conversation floated through the reeds, rumors of prior apprentices whose desire had been captured and recorded, evidence of compliance or deviation. Subtle impressions in clay and pressed leaves, the remnants of previous ceremonies, had become part of the living archive, each telling a story of obedience, curiosity, and the boundaries between them. Perfumed smoke swirled into the night, carrying hints of prior acts, memories of bodies and gestures that had been both observed and recorded. Wati could feel the invisible weight of history pressing down, the knowledge that each step and breath could be interpreted and noted. Sounds carried differently within the hollow, the soft click of bones and shells against the ground amplified, echoing like accusations. Any inadvertent movement could turn attention into scrutiny, turning ritual learning into psychological examination. A small bundle, wrapped in ochre-stained cloth and left deliberately at the waterhole's edge, contained evidence of prior deviation. Within, a pressed reed and folded note bore the stark warning, "Even obedience cannot conceal desire forever." Wati's breath caught as the reality of the ritual's purpose became clear. It was both instruction and investigation. Elders' methods ensured that all acts, intentional or subconscious, were recorded. Smoke hung thick around the circle, carrying subtle scents of previous ceremonies, intertwining past and present. Shadows flickered across carved stones, revealing faint inscriptions marking prior transgressions, secrets captured and preserved in a combination of tokens, leaves, and whispers. The packet's arrival transformed the atmosphere. Observers became enforcers, participants became subjects, and the boundary between teaching and surveillance blurred. Each shell placement, each gesture of hands or tilt of the head could now be interpreted with deadly precision. Patterns in the ledger revealed the intricacies of human will under ritual pressure, illustrating that even the smallest deviation might be noted, stored, and referenced in the future. The ritual's lesson had shifted from ceremonial instruction to the subtle and inescapable scrutiny of human desire. When the moon reached its zenith, the fires dimmed, leaving the circle etched in silver light and shadows. Wadi stepped back, recognizing the lesson. Obedience and desire were inseparable forces, observed in silence, yet recorded with precision. Tokens were returned to their sacred spaces. Shells aligned perfectly, and the waterhole retained the faint scent of perfumed smoke, marking the space as both sanctuary and archive. Elders moved quietly among the stones, confirming with their gaze that every action, every minor hesitation had been accounted for. Across the canyon, whispers of the ritual would echo. Stories of hidden desire and the consequences of deviation carried in hushed tones. Perfumed smoke, pressed reeds, and inscriptions combined to form a living memory, a lesson written in subtle sensory detail rather than words alone. The balance of sacred instruction, scrutiny, and human impulse created an enduring narrative of power, control, and revelation. Even after the circle emptied, its marks remained: impressions on leaves, tokens in ledgers, subtle shifts in posture recorded for the future. Desire could never be fully hidden, and even perfect compliance carried the seed of exposure, preserved in ritual memory and the unblinking observation of elders. Dawn illuminated the canyon, casting pale light over wet sandstone and reeds. Perfumed smoke lingered faintly, a reminder of lessons learned in silence. The Dreamtime whispered that law and desire intertwined, that observation recorded more than words could say, and that even hidden intentions left lasting marks on ritual, community, and psyche. Fog curled over the red earth, thick and suffocating, carrying the scent of crushed leaves and wet clay. A lone ceremonial hut glimmered with torchlight, revealing intricate carvings and ochre stains. Inside, the air trembled with anticipation and unspoken rules. Every gesture, every glance carried weight beyond comprehension. Inside the hut, Miri, a young initiate, knelt on woven mats, her hands brushing against carved symbols in the clay floor. The elders, draped in feathers and painted skins, stood in a circle, their faces illuminated by the flickering torchlight. The ceremony was intended to teach sacred histories and ancestral laws, but the instructions were layered with power dynamics. Each movement could signify reverence or provoke scrutiny. A small bundle of pressed leaves, tokens, and hand-stamped notes rested near the center, ready to be consulted for compliance. The air smelled of crushed bush herbs, perfumed smoke, and faint human sweat, heightening every sensory impression. Neri's heartbeat echoed in the hollow hut as she realized the dual purpose of the ritual: to educate and to record, to observe and to judge. Subtle shifts in posture, the tremor of a hand, even a fleeting expression could be noted, preserved in hidden ledgers kept by the elders. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional crackle of the torches. A single misstep or hesitant glance could transform devotion into transgression, noted invisibly yet irreversibly in ritual memory. As Neri began to follow the ceremonial sequence, the elders' eyes followed each gesture with an almost predatory precision. Sounds echoed in the hut, soft whispers, rustling leaves, and the subtle scrape of hands across the clay floor. Hidden ledgers chronicled every action, entries in the margins of bark-bound notes, small check marks beside names, time-stamped symbols denoting hesitation or deviation. Fragments of prior ceremonies hung in the air, pressed flowers, folded leaves, and faint impressions of bodies that had knelt here before. Rumors of apprentices who had unknowingly crossed boundaries circulated like smoke, their transgressions recorded silently for future instruction. The ceremonial smoke carried faint scents of musk and dried herbs, connecting present observation with historical precedent. Each step Nero took, each tilt of the head, was measured against prior rituals, and any misalignment could trigger subtle admonishments: a shifted gaze, a slight cough, the deliberate flick of a torch. Every gesture, however minor, could tip the balance between acceptance and documented transgression, leaving the initiate in quiet dread. A sudden breeze swept through the hut, stirring the torches and revealing a small packet tucked beneath the ceremonial bundle. Inside lay folded leaves, pressed feathers, and a note marked with ochre. Even silent obedience is observed. Nero's eyes widened as the weight of the elder's vigilance became fully tangible. The ritual had a dual purpose: education and examination, instruction and surveillance. Shadows stretched along the walls, revealing inscriptions and carvings that had silently chronicled previous ceremonies, capturing subtle acts of hesitation or desire. The packet symbolized the elder's authority, turning every act into evidence, every deviation into documented history. Perfumed smoke mingled with the wet clay scent, thickening the air and sharpening awareness. As Nero repositioned shells and tokens according to the ceremonial order, she became painfully aware that even her most careful gestures could be interpreted, recorded, and referenced in the future. Ledger entries, subtle markings, and whispered admonishments combined to create a meticulous archive of both compliance and the undercurrents of desire. The line between ritual learning and psychological scrutiny had vanished, leaving every motion charged with consequence and observation. When the final torch flickered low, the elders nodded in solemn recognition, signaling the end of the ceremony. Nero stepped back, feeling the weight of lessons learned through observation and reflection. Each gesture, token, and whispered sound had been accounted for, recorded in the collective memory of the circle. The hut retained faint impressions: pressed feathers, shifted shells, subtle marks in clay. These were not mere ceremonial remnants, they were evidence of human impulse observed, recorded, and preserved. Perfumed smoke lingered in the corners, a reminder that learning and scrutiny were inseparable. Across the ceremonial grounds, whispers carried the lesson. Desire and compliance coexisted under the watchful eyes of tradition. Even acts performed with full devotion could be reframed as subtle transgressions, documented silently for future reference. Nero recognized that the ritual was more than instruction; it was a living archive, blending education with oversight, power with subtle observation. Knowledge came with vigilance, and even the smallest gesture left marks that would ripple through the memory of the ceremony, recorded by the unblinking eyes of the elders. Dawn cast pale light across the red earth, illuminating impressions left in clay and reeds. Perfumed smoke curled faintly into the air. The elders' silent surveillance had transformed desire and obedience into enduring lessons. Every subtle gesture, every moment of hesitation had been recorded, leaving a permanent trace in the living archive of the Dreamtime. Dawn's first light pierced through the eucalyptus canopy, revealing ochre-stained ground and shadows of ceremonial poles. A hidden alcove glimmered with the faint shimmer of dew and perfumed smoke. The air trembled with anticipation, the past echoing through whispered leaves. Every mark on the earth was a message, every sound a coded warning. In a secluded hollow, the initiate Jerem knelt before a series of carved stones, each etched with sacred symbols and cryptic patterns. The elders circled silently, their ochre-painted faces catching the amber glow of torchlight. The ritual was meant to teach ancestral laws and the sacred rhythm of communal life, but hidden beneath the ceremonial veneer lay layers of observation and control. A small bundle of pressed leaves, feathers, and bark-bound notes rested at the center, ready to document compliance and subtle deviation. Jarum's hands traced the carvings with trembling precision, aware that every gesture, tilt of the head, shift of weight, or pause was observed. The scent of crushed leaves and smoke mingled with damp earth, making each breath heavy and sensory. A faint hum, the elders' murmurings, and the crackle of torches created a tense cadence echoing through the hollow. One wrong move could be recorded forever, transforming intention into permanent notation recorded in secret ledgers that chronicled both devotion and misstep. As the ritual progressed, Jerem moved through sequences of kneeling, stretching, and symbolic gestures, each timed and measured by the silent gaze of the elders. The bundle of notes and feathers on the stone floor was consulted subtly, a quick check of inked marks, time-stamped symbols indicating hesitation, alignment, or misalignment. Whispered fragments of past ceremonies floated through the alcove, stories of apprentices whose subtle gestures had been interpreted as transgression. Ledger pages chronicled every moment, a slight pause in movement, a nervous glance, a subtle tremor, all meticulously logged. The scent of perfumed smoke intensified, and the soft scraping of feet on dirt echoed with each step. Every detail, the tilt of a head, the pressure of a hand on the carvings, was observed and silently assessed. Rumors of past initiates' mistakes were told quietly, the cautionary tales carried in whispers like ghosts lingering in the corners of the alcove. Every deliberate gesture, every nuanced motion could tip the balance between instruction and reprimand, leaving Jerem caught in the unrelenting scrutiny of ancestral authority. Suddenly, a small packet slid across the stone floor, appearing almost magically in the lamplight. Inside were pressed flowers, feathers, and an ochre-stained note that read, "Every action is inscribed, every hesitation counts." The elder's silent observation became tangible. Rituals were simultaneously a test and documentation, teaching and recording in tandem. Jarum's eyes flicked across the carvings, noticing subtle shifts in previously unnoticed symbols, now illuminated under the torchlight. These marks were not merely decorative. They served as a ledger of compliance, desire, and deviation. Each movement, no matter how slight, became evidence of intent, preserved in secret archives bound in bark and ochre. The faint scent of musk and herbal smoke permeated the hollow, intensifying awareness as Jarum adjusted a shell and traced the symbol. The gravity of observation became fully clear. Every subtle action could be recorded, referenced, and interpreted in future ceremonies. Ledger pages thudded softly, as if alive, marking time and documenting acts of compliance and subtle transgression. The ritual's dual nature, educational and judicial, was undeniable, leaving every gesture charged with consequence and immortalized in hidden ledgers. When the torches dimmed, signaling the ceremony's end, the elders nodded, their expressions unreadable. Jaram rose slowly, acutely aware of the weight carried by each measured motion and observed hesitation. The hollow retained the faint scent of crushed herbs and perfumed smoke, evidence of presence and scrutiny. Pressed flowers, feathers, and slight impressions in the dirt testified to actions performed and lessons learned. These ceremonial remnants were more than symbolic. They were tangible records of obedience, desire, and scrutiny. Across the ceremonial grounds, whispers carried the lesson. Even gestures performed with devotion could be interpreted as subtle transgressions documented for future instruction. The ritual served as a living archive, blending education, observation, and psychological insight. Every action and reaction was noted, ensuring continuity of ancestral knowledge, ritual compliance, and subtle power dynamics. Jaram understood that learning, surveillance, and desire coexisted under the watchful eyes of tradition. Even in silence, every gesture left a mark, rippling through the collective memory of the ceremony, immortalized in the living archives of Dreamtime. Morning light revealed faint impressions on the ochre-stained ground, curling smoke from extinguished torches still lingering. Ritual tokens, pressed feathers, and subtle marks in clay and bark spoke of actions recorded, lessons learned, and power observed. Every gesture, hesitation, and motion had been documented, leaving traces that would echo through ceremonies yet to come. The ochre dust swirled as midday sun pierced through a canopy of gum trees. A hidden rock overhang shimmered with perfumed smoke and ritual incense. Shadows of carved figures danced across the rough stone walls. Every scent, sound, and shadow whispered of ancestral law, secret instruction, and the weight of observation awaiting the unwary. In the seclusion of a cliffside alcove, the youth, Marley, knelt before a semicircular formation of stones, each etched with precise ceremonial patterns. Elders encircled her silently, faces painted in streaks of red and yellow ochre, torchlight glinting off bone ornaments. The purpose of the ritual was layered: education in sacred ancestral rhythms, lessons in community hierarchy, and the testing of compliance with unspoken laws. Hidden amidst the ceremonial artifacts were small bundles of bark, pressed leaves, and feathers, meticulously placed to document gestures, hesitation, and subtle defiance. The faint scent of smoke mingled with crushed herbs, creating a sensory landscape that heightened awareness. Marley's hands traced the grooves of the carved stones, every movement scrutinized, every tilt of her head recorded in memory and on discreetly marked symbols. The rustle of leaves outside, the faint murmur of distant ritual chants, and the soft flicker of torchlight combined to form a tense cadence that resonated through the hollow. One misstep, too slow, too fast, too hesitant, could be immortalized in hidden ledgers, transforming innocent gestures into permanent notations of perceived transgression. Marley's performance unfolded like a measured dance, each kneel, bow, and reach precisely aligned to ancestral protocol. The elder's eyes, keen and unwavering, captured every micro-expression, every tremor of her hands or slight hesitation in movement. The bundles of notes, feathers, and bark sheets served as quiet observers themselves, recording evidence of devotion and potential deviation. Whispered fragments from prior rituals drifted through the alcove, cautionary tales of initiates whose misaligned gestures had led to whispered reprimands or public admonishment. The ledger pages, bound in bark and inked with ochre, were consulted silently. A mark here for delay, a small symbol there for improper gesture, a tiny line noting deviation in alignment. Outside, the faint scratch of footfalls and the distant call of birds heightened awareness, echoing like a metronome against Marley's focused movements. Perfumed smoke swirled over the stones, intensifying alertness. Rumors of previous mishaps, the misplacement of a feather, a forgotten gesture, surfaced like shadows, subtle but ever-present, a reminder of surveillance embedded in ritual. Each movement was a test, each pause a potential violation. The weight of observation transformed ordinary gestures into high-stakes acts of scrutiny. Without warning, a small envelope slipped across the stone floor, carried by a thin stream of wind. Inside were pressed flowers, feathers, and a note bearing a single line. All gestures observed, none forgotten. The elder's observation became tangible. Ritual sequences were simultaneously instruction and documentation, teaching and recording intertwined. Marley's eyes scanned the symbols, now illuminated more clearly by the flickering torchlight. Previously subtle carvings revealed coded marks, serving as a living ledger of compliance, hesitation, and desire. Every adjustment of a shell, every careful tracing of a pattern was recorded in invisible memory and tangible evidence. Ledger pages thudded softly, as if marking the rhythm of her movements, the pulse of the ritual. The faint scent of herbs and smoke became almost suffocating, intensifying every gesture and heightening awareness of scrutiny. As Marley reached for a small carved figure, the gravity of the ritual's dual nature, the simultaneous instruction and surveillance, became clear. Every nuanced action had consequences. Every subtle misalignment was noted. Every hesitation could shift perception. The ritual's lessons were inseparable from documentation. Each act of devotion or minor error was preserved in a web of ancestral governance and living archives. As the ceremony drew to a close, the elders lowered their heads in quiet acknowledgement. Marley rose slowly, aware of the unspoken weight carried by each precise gesture, each measured breath. The alcove retained the lingering aroma of perfumed smoke and crushed herbs, each trace a testament to observation and instruction. Pressed flowers, feathers, and subtle impressions in the dirt served as permanent records of compliance, hesitation, and subtle deviation. Across the ceremonial ground, whispers carried the weight of the lesson. Even acts performed with care could be interpreted, documented, and referenced in future teachings. The ritual created a living archive, blending education, surveillance, and ancestral authority, where every movement, no matter how small, contributed to the collective memory. Ledger entries, bark-bound notes, and symbolic impressions ensured continuity, maintaining a delicate balance between instruction, observation, and subtle coercion. Marley understood that ritual, observation, and psychological insight were inseparable, a layered tapestry of ancestral governance. Even in silence, every gesture rippled through the hollow, every impression immortalized, leaving a record that would influence ceremonies and behaviors yet to unfold. Sunlight broke through the canopy, illuminating faint marks in ochre-stained soil. Perfumed smoke lingered, pressed flowers rested in quiet testimony, and subtle impressions in the bark bore witness to all observed actions. Every measured movement, hesitation, and gesture had been recorded, echoing through future ceremonies, ensuring the continuity of ritual and ancestral scrutiny. Twilight descended over the rock pools, reflecting fragmented sunlight across still water. A hush settled as the final ritual commenced, carrying the scent of crushed leaves and distant smoke. Shadows of ancestors seemed to shift across carved stones, whispering of vigilance, desire, and the fragile boundary between obedience and transgression waiting to be tested one last time. At the edge of a sacred waterhole, the elder Nokara awaited, seated on a slab of smooth sandstone, his gaze sharp, unwavering. Initiates gathered, including the young Bida, whose hands trembled slightly while tracing ritual patterns etched into the ground. The ritual's objective was multi-layered: demonstration of ancestral knowledge, obedience to hidden law, and exposure to subtle seduction as a measure of discipline and understanding. Each carved symbol, each small pool of water, and each placement of feather, shell, or ochre held precise significance. The torches flanking the perimeter flickered against moss-covered walls, throwing moving shadows across the ceremonial site, while distant drums beat a rhythm aligned with the initiate's movements. A velvet-like envelope rested near Nokara, its seal unbroken, waiting to deliver hidden instructions or observations after the ritual concluded. Perfumed smoke drifted in arcs, its scent entwined with crushed herbs and earth, compelling heightened awareness. One errant glance, hesitation, or misalignment would trigger a notation in memory, and possibly the sealed record, forever marking innocence or transgression in the ritual ledger. Bida moved deliberately, placing shells along a curved line while balancing the weight of scrutiny and expectation. Every shift of a foot, tilt of a head, and the rhythm of breath was observed by elders whose silence carried authority. Ledger-like impressions were made in soft soil, noting the sequence, precision, and timing of each gesture. Whispers from previous rituals floated in the air, tales of those whose gestures betrayed hesitation, whose subtle deviation had earned quiet reprimands or public admonishment. Feather, bark, and ochre marks provided evidence of minor errors and moments of compliance. Outside, the natural world amplified attention. The distant screech of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the echo of hidden footsteps mirrored the internal tension of observation. Torchlight caught beads of sweat and the subtle trembling of hands. Ledger pages bound in bark remained ready for notation, their presence invisible but palpable, ensuring compliance and maintaining psychological pressure. Each movement risked being immortalized in memory or recorded, transforming ordinary gestures into permanent evidence of adherence or deviation. Without a sound, a small slip of bark drifted across the waterhole's edge, pressed with initialed symbols and a folded note. Actions observed, nothing escapes memory. The elders' surveillance became concrete. Every adjustment of shells, every precise placement of feathers, every trace of hesitancy was now undeniable. Bidara's eyes widened, realizing the ritual served both as instruction and archival record. Ledger pages and symbolic marks in soil confirmed the dual nature of observance, devotion intertwined with documentation. Each gesture carried weight. Each slight misalignment could be referenced in future teachings. The air thickened with perfumed smoke, carrying the subtle sting of crushed herbs. Torchlight flickered across carved stones, illuminating microsymbols that corresponded to precise movements and timing. Every note, every mark, every observed action contributed to a living ledger, a record interwoven with ritual and oversight. Bidara understood that the ritual's completion would not erase the record. Every subtle misstep and act of compliance would echo through future ceremonies and influence the perception of his devotion and discernment. As darkness deepened, the elders lowered their heads in unspoken acknowledgement. Bidara rose slowly, aware that every gesture, breath, and hesitation had been observed, recorded, and silently evaluated. The waterhole reflected faint torchlight, the impression of shells, ochre, and feathers resting in subtle patterns that would inform future rituals. Ledger pages, bark-bound symbols, and pressed notes served as archives of compliance, deviation, and devotion, ensuring continuity and authority within the community. The ritual's conclusion emphasized the inseparability of observation, instruction, and documentation. Every act, minor or major, contributed to a living memory of discipline, desire, and hierarchy. Perfumed smoke lingered, marking the space as a vessel of ancestral scrutiny. Every recorded impression, every symbolic notation, and every observed action would ripple through future ceremonies, shaping behavior, teaching vigilance, and reinforcing the fine balance between obedience and transgression. The power of ritual lay not only in instruction, but in its unbroken, meticulously recorded chain of psychological, physical, and symbolic enforcement. Even as the ritual ended, the echoes of observation persisted, marking the young initiates, the ceremonial space, and the ledger-bound memory forever.